Hi, everyone. It is noon, so we will go ahead and get started. Thanks to Ryan for the jazzy tunes. My name is Emma Schultz. I'm a community forest project specialist with the Minnesota DNR. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to talk through the new grant program that DNR is offering to communities statewide. But before we hear about that, we're going to hear from John Ossis at the Department of Agriculture with a bit of a primer. So you can take it away, John. Go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Thanks, Emma. All right, we'll get this thing going here. Well, like Emma said, I'm just going to give you a quick primer on why it's important to manage for emerald ash borer. So, as many of you on here know, EAB has been here for a while, and it's very destructive, and it can cost communities a lot of money. So right now in Minnesota, EAB has been found in 30 counties, 30 of our 87 counties. But as you can see on that map, there's still many counties with infestations that are yet to reach the larger swath of the trees in that county. So there is a lot of gaps in there and a lot of space where trees are yet to be affected. So I'm just going to try to highlight why it's important to do active management to help slow the spread of emerald ash borer throughout the state. And just as a resource, this is our map that's available online. You can see at that second link. You can also download the data that gets uploaded to this map from the Minnesota Geospatial Commons if you have an interest in that. Most recently, we had 2 new detections in Redwood County and Nicollet County. And so the Redwood County find was in the city of Sanborn, right near the border with Brown County. That was found at a city campground. And then the find in Nicollet County was just across the river from New Ulm, right along State Highway 15, about 3 miles from where it was originally found in New Ulm in 2019. And then we've been seeing a big uptick in EAB activity in kind of the suburbs areas of the Twin Cities and the southern part of the state over by Rochester, and then in Owatonna and Faribault and places like Scott and Carver County and western Hennepin counties. So that's kind of where the bulk of the activity of new finds have been. There's been 27 new cities found in 2021 so far with EAB infestations. So just in general, I mean, how does EAB kill the tree? It's the trees can withstand a little bit of attack. So it's really the numbers of it. So when EAB populations are small, the trees can still be healthy and maintain good canopy. But once EAB populations build up, you have thousands of beetles, and it effectively girdles the tree and it kills the tree. And unfortunately, as we'll see in the next slide, it happens in a pretty fast rate. So many of you have probably seen the death curve. It kind of shows you how EAB populations start out to growing slowly, but then build faster, and you kind of hit this exponential growth curve. And then, the rate at which trees die lags behind that by a couple of years. So the real important thing to try to do is to push out that EAB population growth curve so that you can have as much time as possible to prepare and deal with infested trees as they become visible, and even before EAB gets there. So you're not dealing with a large number of dead trees in a very short period of time. That can really break city budgets and can be dangerous on the landscape. So just in general, just to show what the makeup of ash in communities around the state, we have nearly 1 billion ash trees throughout the state, which is the highest in the lower 48. And so you can see many communities are comprised heavily of ash, especially in western Minnesota, and many counties that are yet to be impacted. They have upwards of 40 to 60% ash in their communities. So it's really a large resource, and they don't have the tax base or the number of staff to deal with a potential of a lot of trees dead in a small amount of time. So it's really important that communities begin preparing before emerald ash borer arrives, and really stick to plans and amp up management activities as EAB becomes established and kills trees in the area. So this is just a nice tool that you can use if you have to work with city councils and things like that to show the value of trees in the landscape. This is the iTree tools, and it helps you calculate the amount of benefit you're receiving from a given tree if you have an inventory and general rigor and health rating for the trees. So it can really show how much those trees provide value, whether it's through rainfall intercepts each year, CO2 absorbed, electricity savings, and things like that. So it's a good tool to use if you have a nice tree inventory to use to advocate for more funding to deal with your trees. Right here's a graph that shows the projected spread rate of EAB in Minnesota. So as you can see, we're at 30 counties in 2021. So we're a little bit above that 50%, the national average spread rate, but we are still a ways below that 100% of national average. So this is important. The more we can go at a slower spread rate, the more money we can save communities and spread out over time, which will make emerald ash borer less of a big deal to deal with. So really our goal is to push that rate as low as possible for as long as possible. And so you can see how that shows up in savings. So this is, lost tree benefits and removal costs. And, seeing at that 50% spread rate or a little bit above that, we're still saving, 1 to 1.5 billion over time if we can maintain that slower spread rate. Slower we go, the more money we save, and the more benefits are retained from the healthy, large, mature trees on the landscape. So it really is important to actively manage for emerald ash borer. We have guidelines for communities to slow the growth and spread of emerald ash borer. So this is a really nice document available at the MDA's EAB webpage. It goes through the different things to do when you're setting up an emerald ash borer management plan and kind of when to do certain types of things. So when you're doing inventory, when to monitor, when treatments and sanitation is required, and when to kind of switch into damage control and with wood management utilization to try to avoid having lots of wood going out of your area that is potentially infested. So if you haven't looked at this before, I highly recommend going through it. It has lots of good links in there too, and it's easy to read and it's a good resource. And just so you know, your managed priorities are going to change. So as you go from an uninfested area to a heavily infested area, when you start out, you're looking for signs of infestation, you're reporting that. Once EAB is found, it's good to have good sanitation, so removing known infested trees and beginning to treat high value trees that are still healthy in the landscape. And then once you get to that heavily infested status, that's really just trying to minimize wood movement and utilize the wood in whatever way possible and dispose of it safely and deal with hazard trees. So really the take-home message here is know what you have and what your target is. So there's many options for creating a management plan. You need to make one that fits your city's goals. It's important to try to dedicate funds for EAB tree removals and replanting and treatments, and to make sure that's funded for some time. And it's really important to communicate early and often with residents to gain buy-in. So the more you can get the word out early, the more chance that your residents are going to be proactive and either treat their trees or plan on having to remove it in the future if they know they have ash on their property. So those things are really core to being successful in managing EAB in your city. That's really about all I have. Thank you. I'm the emerald ash borer technical assistance coordinator for the Minnesota Department of Ag. So if you need to get a hold of me, please feel free to email me or call me. I provide technical assistance to communities with newly found EAB infestations. So we do things like delimit surveys to help initially find where kind of the hot spots of EAB are in the community once you have a detection, and that will help focus initial management actions. Also available for presentations to city councils and public works departments and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. Can you see my screen?
Looks good.
Sounds good. All right, thank you. Again, my name is Emma Schultz. I'm the Community Forest Project Specialist with the Minnesota DNR, and I manage grants to communities across the state, primarily for emerald ash borer management. So let's get started. So in addition to providing grants to local units of government for community forest management, we do additional technical and educational assistance, but the grants are kind of the bread and butter of our program in terms of what we offer statewide to communities right now. And the eligible activities that we're able to fund really depend on the funding themselves. So depending on where our funding comes from, we can fund tree inventories, emerald ash borer management plans, tree removals, tree plantings, and or chemical treatment. And to date, all of our funding has been for activities on public land only. And this is a limitation of our funding. And our grants are all competitive, which means that our applications are evaluated according to set criteria. So if we look at our current opportunity, which just was released today, it is the Protect Community Forests by Managing Ash for EAB grants. I'm going to go through the program in detail for you here, since there are some new things that we haven't funded in the past. So the DNR welcomes applications from all local units of government within Minnesota to assist communities in managing ash for EAB unplanned and improve community forests by planting a diversity of trees and involving community members. We have $2.4 million available to fund projects managing EAB through community forestry activities on public lands. There is no minimum amount to the dollar request that you can submit, and the maximum amount that will be funded is $150,000. And unlike some of our programs, there are no matching funds required through this grant program. All local units of government within Minnesota are eligible to submit applications to this program. This includes cities, counties, regional authorities, joint powers boards, towns, tribal nations, as well as parks and recreation boards and cities of the first class. And once you look through our scoring criteria, you will see that priority will be given to communities who have staff who plan to certify their staff during the grant period, or who will contract with companies with staff who have professional tree care credentials. And those credentials include Minnesota Tree Inspector, International Society of Arboriculture, Certified Arborist, etc. So these will need to be listed on the application. We also will give priority to projects removing and replacing ash trees that pose significant public safety concerns, as well as projects that benefit underserved populations and areas of concern for environmental justice, with that being communities with higher populations of lower income residents or people of color, including tribal communities or both. And please reference the Pollution Control Agency's interactive environmental justice map for more information that is linked in our request for applications. And then further, applicants should describe how the proposed project activities within their application will benefit these communities. Running through a list of eligible project expenses. Eligible expenses are those incurred through project activities directly related and necessary to produce the outcomes described in your grant application. So grant funds in this program can be used for professional contracts for assistance, resident engagement and education, or project implementation by individuals or organizations not a part of the local unit of government, including public tree inventories, ash management plans or emerald ash borer management plans, tree removal and replanting, chemical treatment of ash trees with injectable non-neonicotinoid insecticides, and tree planting. We also will fund site prep and planting, including mulch, watering bags, staking materials, and tree wrap or tree guards. The purchase of chemicals for injectable non-neonicotinoid insecticide treatment for ash trees. Equipment purchases less than $5,000 used to complete the project. Equipment rental, gravel bed construction, and the purchase of trees for diversity. A little bit more on chemical treatment, since that is new in this grant program. We haven't been able to fund that on such a wide level in the past. We do have some stipulations. So funds can be used to treat ash trees if they are treated with a non-neonicotinoid injectable insecticide, such as emamectin benzoate, and if trees are within 10 miles of a known EAB infestation. And this is a limitation due to best management practices and guidelines received from the Department of Agriculture recommending where we should limit treatment to. So grant funds can be used to purchase chemicals if you plan to apply the chemicals as a municipality. You cannot fund staff time, as we'll talk about later, but you can fund the purchase of those chemicals. Or funds can be used to hire a contractor for chemical treatments. And if you are budgeting to treat trees, please list your cost per DBH in the cost per item section of the budget to give us a good idea of what it is costing you and to make sure that it's a competitive cost. So if you go to our project website, we'll make sure that we have the grant website listed in the chat for you here. And you scroll down through eligible project expenses, you'll see this little blurb that says refer to map, showing the buffered areas. Click on that map and it'll take you to this. And we've created a buffer map so that if you go here and you look at this and you're looking for your community, if you are within one of these green blobs, then you are eligible for chemical treatment through this program. And so all the green blobs that you're seeing here are 10-mile buffers of EAB generally infested areas. And so that's where the treatment will be eligible. Now note that there's an updated date here, so it was updated today. We do hope to update this frequently, knowing that there are constant additions to the map produced by Department of Ag, and that there may be new infestations found, outside of this general area. And we also do hope to continue updating this as the grant program progresses. As I'll talk a little bit later, the grant goes until June of 2025. And we do want to offer flexibility to funded communities if an infestation is found in their area, to be able to alter their work plans if an infestation is declared and they want to treat with chemicals. So we will continue to update this into the future for our grantees and through the application process. Moving on to talk a bit about resident education and engagement. Resident education and engagement is something that you will not have to budget for or pay for within your budget form. It's separate technical assistance that's going to go above and beyond the budgeting aspect of your grant. So if you are going to apply for either of these assistance programs, just know that the assistance itself will not have to be budgeted for. However, if you're applying for assistance with tree planting, for example, you will need to purchase those trees in your budget for the planting. And then there are a few other small things, such as if you're providing snacks for planting volunteers, that is an ineligible grant fund expense and must be budgeted through matching funds. So to talk about these two programs, the first one is operational assistance through Tree Trust, working in conjunction with Conservation Corps, Minnesota and Iowa. Tree Trust is uniquely suited to assist communities with the design, planning, and management of community volunteer tree plantings. Tree Trust, with additional support from Conservation Corps, Minnesota and Iowa, is able to supply the tools, technical assistance, and volunteer support necessary to engage and empower your community's volunteers in creating a greener future. And our second program, educational assistance through the University of Minnesota's Tree Steward Volunteer Program. It's a community-based program where city or county staff or representatives will request tree steward training for community members to turn them into knowledgeable volunteers. This education allows local residents to get involved with caring for their community's urban and community forests as advanced volunteer stewards. Tree steward volunteers can be trained in a wide array of topics, and this education can include, but is not limited to, the following: properly planting trees and leading others at planting events, properly pruning young trees to improve the overall health and structure, pruning suckers and sprouts from young and mature trees to ensure safety and proper sightlines for the public, watering devices available for use and the benefits of utilizing watering devices for young and newly planted trees, installation of watering devices on public trees, identification of common tree diseases and pests, how to report trees of concern, and how to report trees of concern how to identify them, and then how to report them to your community so action can be taken. And one note here, while our grant funds do not cover the costs of pruning, young tree maintenance, we can cover the purchase of pruning shears, for example, to go hand in hand with this assistance if you choose to apply for it. So as I mentioned, you don't budget amounts for these two assistance programs. When you go to the application itself, you'll see on the first page options to check one or both of these programs if you are interested in making them a part of your project. And you can, there's a little bit blurb for you to write about how it will contribute to and add to your project. So we're glad to have those opportunities and options for communities this time around. Now to turn to some ineligible project expenses. The list is relatively long and it includes, but is not limited to, costs incurred prior to the start date on the fully signed grant agreement. So you cannot start your project before your contract is fully signed. If you do, it won't be eligible for reimbursement, and we can't count any matching funds either. Probably the most limiting factor for communities is that staff time for local government unit employees is not covered through this funding. That is something that you would have to meet with matching funds if you are using it. We do not cover the trees listed on the Minnesota invasive terrestrial plants list. This includes Amur cork tree, Amur maple, autumn olive, black locust, buckthorn, Norway maple, Russian olive, Siberian elm, and the tree of heaven. We do not cover the purchase of bald and burlap trees, which I'll go into a bit more later. We do not cover containerized trees larger than 20 gallon or bare root trees greater than 2-inch caliper diameter. We don't cover purchase of tree species that already make up 10% or more of your community's public trees, or whose family of trees makes up 20% or more of the public trees. Don't cover plants such as shrubs, living ground covers, sod, grass, seed, or flowers. Do not cover the purchase of land or easements, soil or grade changes, equipment purchases equaling or exceeding $5,000. As I already mentioned, snacks and meals are not an eligible expense. And lastly, experimental practices not approved by DNR. The review process and timeline is listed here. So for our grant, we convene a grant steering committee, which is made up of DNR forestry staff, Department of Agriculture staff, and select knowledgeable stakeholders who will recommend projects and award amounts. The steering committee evaluates all eligible and complete applications received by the deadline. DNR will then review all committee recommendations and is responsible for final award decisions. The award decisions are final and not subject to appeal. So the request for applications was posted this morning on our website. Application questions are due by January 12th, and applications themselves are due January 24th. So that leaves quite a good chunk of time to get working on and submit applications. After that, there will be a 3-week period for grant review with the steering committee, and projects will be selected by February 14th. At that point, the grant agreement negotiations begin and contracts are developed. At this point, we are estimating that contracts will be in place by May 31st of 2022. So at this point, we are hopeful that grant work can begin for all grantees. To run through a typical grant life cycle, if you haven't had a grant with us before, this is our standard protocol for all grants. As I talked through, we start with a request for applications. After the deadline, applications are evaluated and scored, and we select our grantees. Contracts are then developed, and once they're fully executed or fully signed, grant work can begin. And depending on the grant, there are multiple reimbursement request deadlines. How our grants work is that communities do the work up front and then they request for reimbursement. So it's sort of up to the community how they choose to do that. They will obviously have structured it in their project timeline, which they submit as part of their application. So when a period requesting reimbursement, all applicable forms will be submitted to DNR. and we'll be able to see what work has been done. So if you've removed some trees, planted some trees, if you've treated some trees, we'll be able to go out there and perform a compliance check in person on the ground to make sure that the work has been done. Once we can verify that the work has been completed, we will issue a partial payment. And that cycle repeats itself until the community finishes up their project work and submits their final grant report. And at that point, it's kind of like a final compliance check. Depending on the grant amount, there may need to be some more in-depth information there. But then the final payment will take place and the grant will be closed out. So looking at that reimbursement period for this grant, we see that grant funds will be reimbursed up to 90%. That final 10% is going to be retained until the project is completed. And you'll see here are the reimbursement request deadlines for this project. So the first one being December 15th of 2022, running through the final deadline, which is when all project work must be completed. And the final request for reimbursement, along with all reporting, must be submitted by June 30th of 2025. It is completely fine if you finish your project sooner to submit everything sooner, but that is the timeline for that project. Now to go through the scoring criteria. So the steering committee will be reviewing each eligible application on a 100-point scale. And I do recommend that applicants score their own applications before submitting. This will allow you to see if you're meeting all the bullet points really well and if you are adhering sort of to the guidelines of the program. Applications to the Protect Community Forests by Managing Ash for EAB grants will be evaluated and ranked according to the following criteria and points. The first criteria is project overview and need. This is worth 25 points or 1/4 of the total. The application is clear and complete. The community has a readiness to take on a project of the proposed scope and size. The project focuses on significant public safety concerns. The second scoring criteria is the project timeline. This is worth 20 points. The timeline provides specific dates for all activities. It is easy to read and comprehend, and it follows best management practices of not removing ash trees when emerald ash borers are actively flying. So no ash removal is taking place between May and September. The third scoring criteria is the project budget, which is an attachment to the application, and budget explanation, which is an application question. This is worth 15 points. The budget explanation provides specific dollar amounts for anticipated use. The budget totals equal the amount requested. The project is financially realistic and cost effective, and the project seeks to replant more trees than it removes. Our fourth scoring criteria is project impacts on priority populations. This is worth 20 points. The planning and collaboration clearly serves and includes areas of concern for environmental justice. Again, these are communities with higher populations of low-income residents or people of color, including tribal communities, or both. And the applicant demonstrates actionable items for these communities. So some examples would include program focal areas, or perhaps outreach offered in multiple languages or added inclusion through the project. And the impacts on these diverse populations are clear and tangible. Our fifth scoring criteria is communications, worth 10 points. Communication strategies are directly related to project accomplishments, activities, or both, and multiple forms of communication are listed with the potential to reach the public. And emerald ash borer related messaging is included. And finally, our last scoring criteria is key personnel, worth 10 points. All certifications and education degrees are listed for staff or contractors. You know, even if a city employee has a degree that does not relate, we do like to see that. It shows that it's paying attention to the question, and you're listing who is working and for you and responsible for managing the project. A high scoring community will have staff or contractors with a degree in a related field, or a combination or multiple staff with ISA certified arborists, TCIA accreditations, or both. So now moving over from grant-specific information to a little bit of advice for navigating grant writing and how to do so effectively. The care and attention that you as a local unit of government put into your application gives it the best chance of scoring highly and receiving funding. So always spell check. If you can, ask a coworker to review or edit. Brush up on match funding. Even though it's not required in this program, I am guessing that many communities will be providing some component of match funding. So making sure that you do the math twice and then do it one more time will ensure that your project looks its best and will be reviewed as such. And then really lastly, ask. If there's something that's confusing or unclear, please ask. I'm here to help as you navigate this program. Presenting a polished and effective application really do matter. Our grant reviewers are taking very precious time out of their daily schedules to read and review all of these grants. And so when there's an application with glaring errors, whether spelling or grammar, that is noticed by the reviewers and it matters. And while it may seem like a small thing, it really is indicative of your professionalism as a local unit of government and your ability to convey that you can get work done. So that's why outside eyes can be so helpful to you as you're editing and reviewing your own application. And I'd say you should recognize that scoring criteria that I went over and strive to meet each criteria to explain it fully within your application to the best of your ability. Do not write off questions as unimportant because that will likely lead to you losing points. One example I can point to from a recent round of grants is a question regarding personnel. The criteria involved listing all city employees who would be involved in the project, describing qualifications, certifications, that sort of thing. Several communities didn't score well because they left that section mostly blank. And in some cases, we knew offhand from connecting with communities in the past that there was more going on the ground than the application listed. But of course, the only thing that matters is what is written down and listed in these application questions. So while any questions regarding personnel, for example, carry relatively little weight as compared to other questions that capture the essence of a proposed project, it is an indicator of attention to detail and overall application quality. So I do stress that every part of the application is important. Do your best to fully recognize what you are addressing. And then on the flip side, I would question the importance of technical terms. I know there's a lot of municipalities out there who don't necessarily have someone in place who is an expert in this field, and I think that's just fine. You are taking the first steps, perhaps, in trying to start some community forest management in your area. And I don't think that technical terms or jargon are in any way an important indicator of the ability to complete a project. In a lot of cases, these smaller communities might be looking to contract out with someone who is more knowledgeable. So that is just fine. Lastly, I would encourage you to step away from your application and reread it after a few days away. I know, as with most things, applications tend to roll in the day that they are due. But if you're able to step away for a couple days and then come back to it, that fresh look will allow you to evaluate your own writing and hopefully read it as you intend it to be read by others, which is pretty important. I'll talk quickly about understanding match funding, even though it is not a requirement of this grant. Some financial assistance requires recipients to demonstrate a contribution to total project costs. These are match funds. And when they're not required, providing match funds is generally viewed as advantageous, at least in some component. Match funds, once they're a part of a project, have to be reported on by the end of the project. And there may be some match fund limitations depending on the type of funding you are applying for. So keep this in mind. There are two kinds of match funding. Cash match contributions are direct project expenses that you as a local unit of government provide as your contribution to a project. Your cash expenditures for costs related to the specific project. This can include project-related staff salaries if they are dedicated to the project, which is unlikely for this program, consultants' fees or contractor expenses, equipment rentals, and travel costs. In-kind contributions are materials and services, salaries and wages, including fringe benefits, that are being used that are not solely project dedicated, space, utilities, equipment, and/or technical assistance provided by your local unit of government or donated by a third party specifically for the project. Accounting for cash match, like a request for reimbursement, is relatively straightforward since it's a set amount of money dedicated to being spent on your specific project. In-kind match can seem more nebulous because it can become more complicated, and depending on the grant, the rules surrounding it may vary. All contributions, whether cash or in-kind, will be accepted as a grantee's matching funds when those contributions meet the following criteria. They are A, verifiable from the grantee's records. They're B, not included as matching contributions for any other project, contract, or program. C, are necessary and reasonable for accomplishing grant objectives as detailed in the grant work plan. So they have to be related to your project. And D, they're incurred and contributed within the grant period. So again, not before the contract is fully signed or after the grant timeline ends. A bit about calculating match, because it's probably the most common error that we see on applications. Obviously not important for this program, but I want to go over it. And every chance I get, I want to stress proper match calculation. A dollar for dollar match or one for one is easily understood, right? A dollar matched for every dollar of grant funds. But it gets a little more confusing with if it's 60-40, 75-25. So you can use this formula to calculate required match funding. Your total project cost equals how much you're requesting in grant fund dollars divided by how much of percentage that is. So if it's 75% of your project, for example, and then you get your required match by subtracting that grant funded money from your total project cost. Here's an example. How much match is required if a $60,000 grant has a 25% match component? If it has a 25% match component, then your grant funds represent 75% of your project. So 60,000 divided by 75% equals 80,000. And then to calculate your required match, you take 80,000 minus 60,000 and you're left with $20,000. And that is your 25% match requirement. So when it comes to proper budgeting, avoid common mistakes. Make sure that you calculate any required match correctly. And then make sure that your match funds are added to your grant fund request, not considered a part of it. This is the other common mistake that I see. Applications in their budget will list a component for match funds, but they'll kind of list it as a subset of the grant funds they're requesting rather than making it additive, one added to the other. So match funds are considered part of the total project cost, not part of your grant fund request. Do this and you will have a solid budget. I'm going to switch into some frequently asked questions. We get a lot of questions and a lot of times they are the same. So I've gathered some of the frequently asked questions that we've had asked in our past 2 to 3 rounds of grants. So these are real questions. First one, is this grant really only available to first-class cities? This is our most commonly received question. And the answer is no. All cities, all counties, all townships, as well as park and recreation boards and cities of the first class are eligible to apply for this grant. Question, is it appropriate to include maps in our application if we think it would better explain our project area or priority populations? You are welcome to include maps. Note that if you include attachments with your application, please do reference them within the application and explain why they've been included in order to be considered part of your submission. Question, I see that matching funds are not required. Does providing matching funds, whether in kind or cash, improve the scoring of the grant application? While matching funds are not a specific scored component of the application and no matching funds are required, a commitment to the project through the inclusion of match funds may be reflected by grant reviewers in the criteria community has a readiness to take on a project of the proposed scope and size or within the project budget criteria. However, I will say it again, matching funds are not a specific scored component of the application. Will we need a council resolution to be submitted with this grant? Council resolutions are not needed on our end as a part of this grant. Depending on your unit of government, you might need one in order to submit an application. but that's not something that we ask for. Question, I would like to get a species. The species and stock list must come from you, the applicant. The 2010 rapid assessment for your community can be used as guidance for what to avoid planting if you do not possess a current tree inventory. And the guidelines in the request for applications will let you know what stock you can select from in order to be eligible for reimbursement. If you haven't developed a species or stock list and would like guidance, reach out to us and the UCF team can provide you with an example. Question, I manage a homeowners association. We wanted to reach out to see if homeowners associations are eligible to apply for this grant. All applications must come from a local unit of government. If you're a homeowners association, I recommend reaching out to your municipality if you are looking to propose a project, but know that all funds must be utilized on public lands only. Question, our planting may be done over 2 years. Can we submit multiple years under the year and season of plantings question in the 3-year tree maintenance plan? Or does all of the planting through this grant need to be done in 1 year? Multiple years are fine, as long as the work is finished by the end of the grant, which is June 30th, 2025. So feel free to include all appropriation within one tree maintenance plan. And that is an additional document as a part of the application that you will submit if you're planting trees. Question, why are you requiring containerized stock and not allowing balled and burlap trees? If the cost is the same, can we spend the money on balled and burlap trees instead of containerized trees? This is a good question. We get this a lot. We allow reimbursement of up to 20-gallon containerized or 1 to 2 inch bare root trees. Balled and burlap stock is not eligible for reimbursement in this grant program due to the additional cost, care, and skill that are often needed to properly plant balled and burlap trees. This is especially the case when trees are sold with excessive soil over the root collar flare. Stem girdling roots may be present and trees may be planted too deeply. While this may be mitigated in your community by knowledge and proper planting techniques, which is great, it may not be the case for other communities. Since we aim to see trees planted with our funds alive and well into the future for all grantees equitably, we have made the decision to not reimburse for B&B stock at this time. Question, is my municipality eligible to apply if we don't currently have emerald ash borer present? Yes, definitely. All local units of government across Minnesota are eligible to apply. Question, can grant money be used to assist private residences within the city to remove infested ash trees from their property? If you have been following along, you know this one. Project funding stipulates that funds can be used on public lands only, so tree work on private property is not an eligible expense through this grant program. Question, I would like to use the grant funds for removal and stump grinding. We would plant replacements 1-for-1 with separate budgeted dollars. I think it would be more efficient to manage them as separate contracts. Is that an okay approach? Our grants require that each tree removed be replanted, and the only way for us to monitor and manage this is to make it a requirement of the grant. Grant applicants can structure their budgets however they choose to make this feasible for them. For example, they could use grant funds for removal and cover the costs of tree planting with match funds if they wish. However, to make sure that replanting occurs at a 1-to-1 minimum, both those removals and those planted trees have to be incorporated into the grant application and budget. We have more frequently asked questions, which we will be adding to our website, and any other questions that roll in, we will add to the website as well. As I mentioned, questions will be taken through January 12th. And then meanwhile, I would like to do a funding acknowledgement. Funding for this project was provided by the Minnesota Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, as recommended by the Legislative Citizen Commission on Minnesota Resources. The trust fund is a permanent fund constitutionally established by the citizens of Minnesota to assist in the protection, conservation, preservation, and enhancement of the state's air, water, land, fish, wildlife, and other natural resources. Currently, 40% of net Minnesota state lottery proceeds are dedicated to growing the trust fund and ensuring future benefits from Minnesota's environment and natural resources. With that, thank you very much for joining us today. If there are questions, I am happy to take them now. And if you come up with questions later, totally fine. Just send us an email.
Emma, this is Eric. There was one question that came in, and the request for the presentations, if they would be printable. So I don't know if there's a way, if you want to make them available, if they're on the website already.
These presentations are not yet on the website, but we will add them to. I'll get John's and I'll add mine as well. And yeah, we'll definitely make sure they're there. We will also put a link to this recording once we have it on our grant website as well. I see that Jen asks, do communities need to record a declaration or certification for this grant, like what was needed for bonding grants? No, these are not bonding funds. We do not need that additional information, or we do not have that additional hurdle for you to jump through with this funding. Our community is restricted to planting only native trees. Nope, that is not a requirement of this grant either. Question, will the funding be available for multiple years? Yep, so how the project will work, if you are funded, you will be funded through June 30th of 2025. So it is the project will span that time period, and then you will have the opportunity to request reimbursement periodically over the years through June 30th of 2025. Are there any limitations on equipment that could be purchased with grant funds? Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're looking to buy some computers for your office, that's probably not gonna be an appropriate use of funds. So if you have specific questions, definitely reach out with them. Commonly, communities will buy things like, a watering tank attachment for a pickup truck, that sort of thing. So if you have specific questions, reach out and ask, and I'm happy to run through those questions with you. Yeah, one more question. Will the DNR have other grants for communities? Yes, we will. We will have another 1.6 million that we'll be offering probably late next spring. That is for 2 years of funding. It's the same program that we offered this year that we're just getting started preparing for EAB. The legislature appropriated it 2 years in a row. So this year we were able to offer 1.6 million. Next year we will be able to offer 1.6 million. And then they also listed $400,000 into the future of funding for that program. So it's, a much decreased amount compared to 1.6 million, but we can at least confirm that we'll have 400,000 going forward after next year. Any other questions? Is there a death curve for specifically Minnesota? John?
No.
My name is Monica Randazzo. I'm here on the University of Minnesota's St. Paul campus.
Sorry about that. No, there isn't a specific death curve for Minnesota.
All right, well, thank you again, John. Appreciate you being here today to speak. And thanks to all of you for coming.
Thanks, Emma.